Hello, and welcome to The Queer Gaze, where we dissect queer media from every country, complete with nuanced discussion of representation and issues.
This season, we've organised our titles by theme, and we'll be comparing popular, well known films with lesser known films.
And you can support The Queer Gaze and get access to extra content at patreon.com/The Queer Gaze.
And you can follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze.
All right, so Conrad, we are back to talk about the other side of the equation, the lesser known title. And this even applied to you and I because we, respectively, had not seen A Moment in the Reeds.
We had not, no. So this is the lesser known path on our rural internalized homophobia and repression theme that we're on at the moment. So this is a 2017 Finnish romantic drama film written and directed by Mikko Makela. It was his feature directorial debut. He was educated in London, and so, not surprisingly, this debuted at the London Film Festival,
Right.
where I believe it was felt to be, well, according to the Wikipedia page, was felt to be by some reviewers the surprise, the sort of gem of the festival.
Ooh, okay.
Was also compared with God's Own Country.
Well, yeah. This is one of those unfortunate events where I think the film gets unfavorably compared to a more popular, well known title. But everyone should realize that the two films were actually in production at the exact same time. So this is not a riff on God's Own Country or vice versa. It just happens to be something in the air.
Yeah. One of those things where two people are inspired by the same film at the same time, or the same thought. Yeah.
Yes.
You wait for a moment, and all of a sudden there's three Mars movies all at once.
Yeah, tsunami, asteroids, all the good stuff, including, hey, I'm on a farm and I'm looking to dick down.
Yes. And here comes somebody who is an asylum seeker or a refugee or a
Hmm.
member of a minority who is working as a laborer for the farm, and we fall in love.
Yeah. I think one of the things that interested me the most about this is that this is one of those very tightly confined narrative timelines. So, this is a
Mm.
film that takes place over the span of a weekend. It's about 72 hours that these men meet. They're working on renovating the Finnish man's father's summer cottage so that he can sell it. And then he falls in love with the Syrian architect who is working a shitty job as a laborer. But it's basically like we meet, we wait for dad to leave, and then we act on our impulses. We have a very romantic, very sexual weekend, and then everything goes to shit, and the movie is over.
Yes, rather quickly over. Let's be
Yes. The abrupt ending felt around the world.
I know. I cut to a black screen, and I thought, well, that's not the end. There's music playing. This is just
Surely.
taking a breath. We're going to come
Hmm.
back up in a second, and here comes the finale. Nope.
Yeah, yeah. You think, okay, we'll touch base with them 2 years later, 5 years later when they reconnect, and no credits. Okay, motherfucker.
I know. I felt cheated. And maybe
Yeah,
that's because, again, I was going to compare it to God's Own Country and I was waiting for the same epilogue, but
yeah.
it does not come.
No, no. Okay, so I'm curious, obviously, as we said, this is the lesser known title in this double bill. Do you find this film successful? Do you think that more people should know about A Moment in the Reeds?
It's a curious one. There are a number of things about it that I really like. It
Hmm.
is obviously a low budget production, independent,
Yeah.
sort of crowd funded to a certain degree. The filmmaker Miko talked about how it's very difficult to get narrative films, particularly ones that are representing the LGBTQ community, off the ground
Yep.
in Finland. So you can appreciate that and then appreciate the quality of what they've achieved,
Yes.
particularly the performances.
Oh, yeah.
And how much intimacy you get out of this handheld camera work that never strays too far from the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So they're sort of making the most of their limitations, I think. So I appreciated that. I particularly appreciated the development of the relationship between the two central characters. Levy, who is a Finnish son who has left the farm, well, left the summer cottage,
Yeah.
and gone to Paris to pursue his dreams of education and also sexual freedom.
I was gonna say, get the fuck away from dad. Yeah.
Get away from dad. Also, there is the ghost of the mother sort of haunting the background of this story. So
Mm-hmm.
he is clearly leaving a troubled home and also pursuing, I think, sort of his mother's dream too, because
Yeah.
she had an interest in France and Paris, played French records as she painted, but had never achieved her artistic dream. So he's chasing his mother's dream,
Mm-hmm.
maybe his mother's dream for him. And then you have Tariq, who is the very quiet, very softly spoken Syrian architect who is a refugee and who is just making ends meet as a
Mm-hmm.
handyman because he cannot get a job in Finland because he doesn't speak the language.
Yeah.
And as the film progresses, we learn more about each of them and we watch their relationship grow over a short period of time. So it sort of reminded me of something like Before Sunrise, where
Right.
you're just intensely around these two people, watching their relationship develop. And
Yeah, it's interesting that you said Before Sunset because I can definitely see the comparison. I was leaning more towards Andrew Haig's Weekend, which is
right,
also sort of falling along the same lines, but it does have the queer element. But I love these kinds of little intimate films. I can definitely understand why somebody might watch this movie and say, but there's only really like barely four characters in this. Like it is so small scale. But I think if you zero in and connect with these performances and you like these characters, for me, this was such an easy watch. I was incredibly emotionally invested. And these two actors, we should note, they're both queer in real life. And this was very important to Migo because he felt like only queer actors could actually see the project through, like embody these characters and really live in the performances. And I think, I mean, as a queer viewer, I was so appreciative of the fact, not that I thought, when we were talking about Brokeback Mountain, that Jake and Heath were doing bad jobs, but I mean, when we get to our sex talk, we can talk a little bit more about the comfort level. Like, I think there's just a more realistic depiction of sex and sexuality in this film, which I so greatly appreciated.
yeah, you are absolutely right. Yeah, the intimacy was much more believable than Jake and Heath,
Yeah.
and there was a comfort level there that you can immediately recognize.
Hmm.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the things that disappointed me about this is I almost feel as though, well, as you learn more about the very, very quiet and reserved Tariq, when he starts unveiling the things that are on his mind, the
Yeah.
pressures that he is under,
Yeah.
they kind of make Levy's feel really, really petty.
So shallow. So I saw a couple of different reviews describe Levy as the prodigal son returning. And it's hard to get away from that, right? Like, there's this moment where Tariq says, this country is just so white. And I
Mhm.
fucking felt that in my bones because I was just like, yeah, as a Syrian refugee who we later learn has crossed between something like five different countries to get to where he is and then just immediately get responses like Levy's father, who, he shows up and has a meltdown in the car over the fact that Tariq does not speak Finnish. And you're just thinking, your problems. Like, I think I even messaged you that there's a moment at the dinner table between the three men where Levy's father is talking about how they're renovating this summer cottage because he needs to sell it because his paper company doesn't do very well anymore because people aren't reading the newspapers. And I messaged you like, oh, I've got these problems. My paper company isn't doing well. Syrian refugee. blinks like, "Oh, yes, tell me more about your problems. They're very relatable and real to me."
I know, and you can't help as the film progresses feeling as though the wrong central character is the central character. I really want to know Tariq's story. I feel as though he
Right.
deserves more screen time and more attention than the kid who's, fretting about his thesis and the fact
Right.
that he doesn't get on with his dad and feels repressed in some way. And you think, oh, really? This guy could
Yeah.
die. What are you doing?
That is so interesting because I don't disagree with you at all, but I guess before I entered this conversation with you, it didn't occur to me that Levy is meant to be the protagonist. I saw them as co-leads. But,
Mm,
now that you're raising it, it is barely obvious that the dominant perspective is from Levy. And we are getting to know things about Tariq, but he does feel like, oh, this is a person who has entered into our main character's life.
yeah. And the character is the same age and coming from the same experience as the writer director, and they
Right.
shot it in his hometown.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not suggesting that that makes it autobiographical, but it does mean I imagine that it is informed by his perspectives and his life experience and the sort of things that were on
Right.
his mind as a young man growing up in this rural area and feeling isolated and restricted and repressed and so on. So you can't help but feel that the film itself is being overindulgent and then brings in this much weightier issue, which we can get to in its lip service in the bonus
Hmm.
section. But I just feel as though there is this major issue in the room that is just not being substantially addressed and almost makes the film seem kind of overwhelmed by this thing that's just sort of hovering in the background. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm satisfied that he just vanishes with no grace note at the end, and we're left with the sun standing at the edge of the landscape and possibly experiencing the beauty of it, which, as he talks about when he's talking about
Hmm.
the poet Carlo Sarkia, probably not pronouncing that correctly either, not appreciating the beauty of this landscape because all he could see was the ugliness. And you think, so are we supposed to feel
Yeah.
satisfied with the end of this movie that he now appreciates his homeland? And you think, I don't know, does that work?
Yeah, yeah. I like the line as a sort of through line over the duration of the film, but it's so hard with endings, right? Like endings can really make or break a movie experience. And here, this
Mm,
abruptness, this feeling that, okay, maybe we have followed the wrong person, or it's just the story feels unfinished. And I very much think that that was the intention, but it doesn't satisfy. And as a result, it's hard not to walk away from the film feeling like, oh, I just wish there was a little bit more there. And to circle back around to Tariq as a character, I think Badi Kabani is doing such a fantastic job. Like, I really, truly do think both of these performers are amazing. I
mm,
saw a couple of people, and I could not figure out whether these claims were substantiated or not, but I did see a few people in their reviews speculate or hint that there was a fair amount of improvisation in terms of the dialogue. And I'm trying to
okay.
figure out how much Kabani brings to the dialogue about being a refugee or an asylum seeker from a personal experience, or if this was something he was just a bit more culturally aware of. But those moments
Mm.
I do think hit very strongly as a result.
They do, yeah. And you make, I don't know, I just wonder, like you say, how much patience he has. Well, he just seems to have boundless patience for Levy. And the thing that strikes me is that although Levy is a young man in his 20s, he's in further education, he's doing his thesis, so doctoral thesis. So, he's in his mid 20s even, but he doesn't,
Yeah, yeah.
he reads very young.
Yes.
And the whole thing where the father is, they're sort of sneaking around while the father is out and making out in the
Mhm.
tool shed where father hides all the things that he doesn't want to face.
Yes, let's hide all the things all the things we don't wanna face. Let's do in the tool shed, shall we?
Yeah, put the Edith Piaf records in there, the photograph of my wedding, and now my son, an Assyrian, is
Hmm.
making out in there. Yeah, I thought that was very telling. But it does put them into this space of being teenage
Yes.
secret lovers sneaking
Uh-huh.
around, and it makes Levy feel very, very young. And I don't feel as though Tariq feels very comfortable with that. And he just seems boundlessly more wise and older than Levi.
I mean, I think that's by virtue of their different experiences, though. Like, I
Mm.
feel like that was a bit of a sticking point for you. It didn't bother me at all, in part because, well, because Tariq has lived a more thorough life. You know, he has that aged quality, and even in the somewhat unsatisfying ending of the film, when he says, I can't look at the ugliness of this country because I have to make this my home. And you're like, yeah, because you don't have alternatives. Whereas Levy, it's so easy for him to say, oh, I just walk away from my father. I walk away from my problems. I go to the queer district of Paris where I live with my friends or roommates. Folks who aren't watching the video, I used air quotes, but you very much get this impression that he's still a child because he has the privilege, the white privilege, to kind of live out this juvenile fantasy of, oh, well, I'm just going to fuck the day laborer because we've got an instant attraction. And the repercussions for him don't exist because he just gets to leave. Whereas Tariq doesn't have that option. He has to make everything work.
Yeah. There was another stark contrast that really helped bring this out for me, which was the hovering threat of military service.
Yes, yes. Such a foreign concept for me as a Canadian. I'm just
Mm.
like, oh, we do not do that. But I recognize there's still so many countries that do.
Yeah. South Korea, of course.
Israel.
Yeah. Lots of Scandinavian countries, I think, just because their populations are so small. So it's kind of a
Right.
necessity. But whereas Levy kind of views it as probably an unpleasant, awkward
Hmm.
inconvenience. Again, for Tariq, it's like, yeah, I could die.
Yeah, because I will be sent to the front lines. And I mean, I've got some statistics that we'll talk about when we dive into our subcategories over on Patreon. So, people, if you want to hear a little bit more of the kind of background that's informing the film, I do think that it's really clever how we're using the specter of military service, the Syrian civil war, and so on. But we're not going into all of the specific details because at the end of the day, this is still about two men falling in love over a long weekend. And I just think the movie's really clever in that regard, even though I do think it's going to fly right over the heads of a bunch of people who maybe don't have the background or who aren't as informed.
Yeah, sure. No, I do think it gets it right because there is a chance that you can introduce an element that you really don't fully understand or
Hmm.
appreciate the weight of it, and it threatens to overwhelm your movie or make you look as though
Yes.
you're being disrespectful in some way.
Hmm.
But I don't think it does that. I think it does it just enough to do it justice.
Yeah.
It doesn't really go into the sort of depth that I personally wanted, but that's not what the movie is. And
Yeah.
you have to live with and critique the movie that you're watching, not the movie you
Yes.
wanted to watch.
I strongly agree. Yeah. Because yeah, spoiler alert, I kind of felt the same way.
Yeah. No, if I wanted to watch Waltz with Bashir, I could watch Waltz with Bashir again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious then, we're talking about this with this theme of sort of rural repressed homosexuality or internalized homophobia. And of course, we both selected this film sight unseen. And ultimately, I came away from it being like, oh, okay, this isn't exactly the best example of that. But I did find it interesting. At no point do we ever broach a conversation of, well, dad, I'm fucking queer, or, hey, Tariq, maybe if your family is going to make the journey, they've applied to come to Finland to be with you, and they're hinting that you don't seem very excited. Maybe you need to address why you wanted to come to a country where you could live freely as you are. And we're not ever having that conversation with either set of families.
No, we're just hinting at it. I mean, the father clearly knows about his son's sexuality. He's clearly
Hmm.
not happy about it. It
No.
does. touch on one of the aspects that I learned from reading the Farm Boys book, which was given to Heath Ledger
Right.
and Jake Gyllenhaal when they were preparing for Brokeback Mountain, which is, one of the factors that play so heavily into these farming communities being so conservative is this fear of what everybody else will think of you
Right.
in a vocation where you rely upon the whole community in order to
Hmm.
survive
Yeah.
originally. And you can see that here, that the father is very, very concerned about how he can show his face in front of the village if they all
Yep.
know that he's bonking the help. So that comes up, but otherwise it's just sort of brushstrokes. It's never really broached
Hmm.
in any detail.
Yeah, I thought it was almost like our previous discussion. It was handled in an interesting, maybe not always fully satisfying kind of way, but I appreciated that this is probably closer to a lot of people's real experiences than something like mine, where I travel home for the holiday so I can tell my parents, hey, I like men, and you're going to have to deal with it. Here it's like, I can't have the conversation. So we just don't, even though it's sitting in that uneasy feeling around every conversation, every interaction. Like the dinner sequence in this movie is so uncomfortable because the dad is clearly picking up what's going on. Like there's this fantastic moment where Mika actually zeroes in on the two men's hands as they pass a water bucket. And you could tell that the dad clocks
Mm.
it, but we're not saying anything because it's just so much better to be awkward but not having to actually address the elephant in the room.
Yeah. And one of the things, just formally, that I'd like to mention before we run out of time, the lack of score and
Oh,
how that really created that sense of quiet naturalism where you really hone in on the details. So every silence, every look, every glance, all
yes.
of it is so intensely heightened by the fact that there isn't a score plastered over it. There is only a couple of times that there is a cue. The first one arrives an hour and 8 minutes into the movie,
Whoa.
and it's over a montage of the two of them actually in the
Right.
reeds, which I was glad to see because up until that point, we'd been shaking
Why is
that
this movie
shack
called?
down. There was a moment in the sauna. There was a moment in the summer cottage. There
Hmm.
were moments everywhere, but
Yes.
there was not one
No
in the
reads.
reeds.
Who named this movie?
But we got there in the end. We did have a moment in the reeds.
There we go. There we go. This is so fun. I love having conversations with you in part because you pick up on the score. I never pick up on the score. So I saw that someone contributes the music to this movie, but I wasn't realizing that there was that lack of. I think one of my biggest issues is that typically if I notice a score, that means that it is so bombastic or so full on in your face that it's actually become a distraction. But I
Mm.
did really appreciate this movie because it's so intimate. It's inviting you in, right? Like we are somewhere between a voyeur and a third member of this sex party weekend that it's hard. And I say that facetiously, but like we are a fly on the wall of this relationship. But I so deeply appreciate all of the looks, the moments. Like to me, it's gorgeous cinematography, fantastic performances, but also this feeling that I am there living in the moment with these two men. And I appreciate that I can just sit there and experience it myself and not be swayed by music to make me feel certain things.
Yeah, exactly that. So yeah, I think that really contributed to the feeling, the intensity and the intimacy of the movie, I thought. So yeah, it's a
Hmm.
little movie on little resources. I think they made the best use of those resources. Although I will say there is a boom microphone in the shot in one scene, and I spotted it. So yeah, that broke it for me a little bit. There we go.
Well, what one minor technical snafu does not break the movie, but yeah, uh, first feature.
First feature and a very impressive one. But I hear the film that the director Miko Michaela has released this year, Sebastian, which is about sex work, is raising even more eyebrows and getting even more applause. So
Mm.
Uh, Definitely one to watch.
I can say that it is one worth seeking out. I have seen this because I saw it at a film festival earlier this year, and I quite like it. And it is very
Mm.
morally murky.
Oh, interesting.
Might have to talk about it later.
Yeah, I think we should. I think it's on Blu-ray from Kino Lorber in the
That
US.
would make sense. Kino loves them a queer film.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, folks, that will wrap up the main feed discussion of A Moment in the Reads. If you want to hear a little bit of extra commentary and talk about that sex, then you should hop on over to Patreon so that you can hear more of our discussion.
Oh yeah. Bye for now.